Hey everybody, it's Calvin, the project texturing lead. Um, so in the past couple days, I've seen some common issues that instead of responding individually one-on-one at the same time, figured I'd just do an entire video to cover all of the feedback that we have. So, kind of part of the issue that we're seeing is the textures that we're getting are not fully within the art style. And it's kind of a case similar to, I don't know if you heard about this, but Assassin's Creed did a crossover with Attack on Titan. And you know, Attack on Titan, the Titans have this very grotesque, dramatized appearance with their faces. And when they did this crossover, you get something that's looking pretty ridiculous in comparison to how Assassin's Creed looks. And you know, this Titan is very out of place in context of what the game's art style is. And so that's in a way what some of the challenges and misunderstandings of the workflow that we've tried to set up have ended up creating. So this is going to be a live demo of one of my own assets to show you how the smart material works and go in a more in-depth explanation of how the different levers work, just so we can get a more unified art style. Because, you know, when it comes to other projects, you know, Mario games will have a lot of bright colors, anime kind of games will have that more cel-shaded look, you know, Call of Duty games will have more of that dirt and grime, and our project is going for a more hand-painted look, so I'm going to go through the whole process, and hopefully this can give you all a better understanding of what the workflow we've set up is intending to produce. So let's start. Gonna import one of my own assets here. And for resolution, I have gotten some questions on this. I personally wouldn't go any smaller than 512. 1024 is kind of a good baseline just for texturing in general. But since this is one of my personal assets, I'm going to go with the 2048. And I'm going to start that import. And so, let's just do a quick setup how I like it. I'm going to put the main focus on my model here. Hit F to shrink down the texture sheet. And you don't necessarily need to have this open. It's useful depending on the workflow. And then I'm just going to do some quick presets to change some settings here just to make my personal working in Substance Designer feel easier. I'm going to take this environment opacity, just turn that up to 30. And then I'm going to crank the blur up to 100. Then going down to camera, or environment world alignment, here it is. Going to set this to camera. What this does is just sets it so that as I move around, the lighting follows the camera movement. So that way when you're spinning around to check how your texturing is producing results, you don't have to move and then shift move the lighting. The lighting is just going to follow the camera, but you can still move the lighting as you see fit, but I just like this much better. Alright, now let's go into the texture baking. For output size, I'm going to have this match my actual texture sheet. This can lead to some interesting results sometimes, but generally having it match what your current sheet is good. I'm going to go down to ambient occlusion. I'm just going to double this number. And I'm going to put self-occlusion, the same mesh name. And this is just to avoid some of the strangeness that can happen when you bake stuff in Substance Painter. Do the same thing here with curvature, 64. Position, nothing changed here. Thickness, don't think I need to change any of these. And then that self-occlusion to same mesh name. And then after that, we'll just hit bake. It's gonna run through, do its operations. Right. I'm just gonna go through, check for any odd artifacts, not seeing anything strange, which means we don't have to open up Maya back up to fix any strangeness. So we're good here. And just for this demo, I'm just only going to focus on the main body. Um, this is, some of you may or may not know this, but how I personally like to export my models is to create different materials inside of Maya for different parts of the vending machines of the model. And so when you export that, you'll get these different materials here in your texture set list. So I'm just going to turn off the details and the items thing here. So now we only have this, and you may see some artifacts from the other parts of the model, but that's just because they're disappeared. Sometimes you'll see shadows from your ambient occlusion, stuff like that, but look. Alright, now moving on to the actual texturing. First, I'm just gonna drag in my material in here. Asking me to save. Oh, that's a project, not an actual material. Whoops. There it is. Drop this up. Make sure that my preferred settings is just set to the project and import. It's automatically filtered to the smart material. Gonna delete the default paint layer. Drop this in here. Then I'm just gonna turn everything off except for the base color. Now, the way we have this set up, we are only concerned with the color channel inside for most of the props that we're having you texture. We do not need to worry about height, roughness, metal on some occasions if it's a metal object, but normal, opacity, emissive. These are all things that we aren't worrying about. We're just going to focus on the color. I've noticed some people have gone into their actual materials, say for stretched up a wood or a tile. I guess it's gonna be just a fabric. Yeah, it's like a fabric. Drop that in and use that as their color. You know, they come here, turn this off, turn this on. You know, this extra detail that this material is putting on to our texture kind of will end up destroying the effect that we're going for. So we just only want to work with color for most cases. And speaking of color, I personally like to pull up reference images, so I have this collection of vending machine images I've been using as a reference for this project. And something you can do as a color, you can take the DAP little eyedropper here, moving on to my second monitor, and actually pick a color from your reference image, and it will just copy that. So this is a really good way to get your base color right off the bat. I prefer doing it this way because it helps meet expectations. I know some of you have been given expected colors for your project, for some of your projects. And using this eyedropper on an actual reference image is a great way of getting that base color real quick. And I'm just gonna go in here and check the values. And I kind of just like to simplify things a little because later down the line when we're going to go into our coloration, it just has this and our other filters and effects. This is just going to be a good baseline to have some simpler values. And so now we're going to go into colorization. And it looks like we're going to have some curvature issues based on how the model is set up, which is good because I know some of your models were having these kind of challenges. So first off, just going to focus on the first color here, and then for the sake of editing, I'm going to turn the blending back up to 100. And so the first thing I like to do in terms of color, just going to come here, copy the hexadecimal number real quick, go into here, open this back up, and paste it in. Then I'm going to increase the brightness, say by 0.200, and then lower the saturation by about 100. So we get this color. It's kinda more of a highlight, kind of a low effect. It's alright. May not settle with that, but let's just go into the mask and play with the controls to get something that's covering the model more in general. You can see it's kind of focusing around the corners in some cases, and then leaving these flat areas just fine. So that is going to be something that's going on. Probably here. Curvature. Yes, our curvature opacity and our world space normal. These controls will help us adjust that balancing. So if I crank up the curvature, it's going to get more strong around those edges. And it doesn't seem like it's going through that general change. So now we're going to try the world space normal. Just crank that up a little, and there we go. We start to see it spread around the rest of the body. So, getting a much more spread out effect. And again, these two channels are taking in the data that you produced when you baked the model. So got that baked in and producing a much more uniformed effect. Let's play with the curvature a little more just to see. It's just making my curves pop out more and not what I'm wanting. Let's try bumping this up a little more. There we go. Nice spread out effect. And that makes me see how my colors are spreading out here. And going back to color, I think I want to brighten this up a little more. Nah. Gonna reduce the saturation more. There we go. Getting some nice highlight details. Alright, going back to the filter. Now let's play around with the mask that we had set up. So, how this whole effect is being generated, this mask editor, it's taking two different texture sets and it's blending them together based on what you've set the balance and the contrast for each texture to, along with blending the opacities of both textures. And to explain this a little better, I have Substance Designer opened up here. This is a separate substance program that Adobe has made, and we're not expecting you to use this project, but it's just here for a visual aid to showcase what is going on. So right now I have this grunge sample texture map right now on all my outputs. And all I'm just going to do first is just going to slide around with the balance, and you can see the color is becoming more full or more darker the more I slide this out, except for the most extreme parts of the texture. Balance is kind of, increasing the overall strength of that whiteness. And, that more that whiteness gets stronger, the more details become illuminated. Contrast, however, is, strengthening the darks and making them more full. If I turn up the zero, you get this wide value of whites and grays. But if I crank this all up, the darks are getting more extreme and the whites are getting more extreme until you get, only darks and only whites. Lowering the balance now, that's just affecting the strength of those whites and how much they dominate versus the dark and how much they dominate the texture. And so that's what's going on when you are sliding around these controls. And so right now, the texture is a grunge paint circular and a clouds one. So it's getting some interesting wide streak effects here. Let's see what happens if I boost up this contrast. That's giving it a much more body look there. I'll play around, see what the effects is. If I drop this down to 5, that becomes a lot smaller. Maybe if I drop the contrast back down to 5, kind of spotty, but nothing. So let's go down here to the clouds, start moving our filters, contrast, making, and again, this is blending the two different maps together. So moving up my contrast is making this a little more faded versus going down makes it a lot more stronger. So let's try putting it at 5, and then let's see what balance is doing. Moving up balance just makes this really strong. Moving up down really makes it go faded away. So I'm just going to leave that at 5. Now let's go all the way back up here to our texture opacities. Let's see what happens. Let's start moving down. Moving texture 1 down, that's making this much more cloudy texture as that dominates the blending. So, and moving up texture opacity 1 is going to make it much more brush stroke strong. And probably just going to leave that by default. Gonna wait till the stylization filter gets turned on before I start making some more fine-tune adjustments. And that's gonna be color 1. Let's turn on color 2. Color 2 is currently this purple, and I think just gonna give this more saturation and darken this a little more. Maybe slide this around a little. I know I'm typing in values here, but this is just how I prefer to work. And it's starting to stand out from the white, from that light blue we set up, and it needs to get the world normal filter control turned up here. So we're going to go back here. I believe it was 0.35. So now we got that, and kind of overlapping. It's a little strong. I believe I dropped the balance to 0.5 and contrast to 0.25. If I just open up the white, yep. So I got a similar streak here. Let's go that to 0.6 just to make it a little stronger. There we go. And I'm gonna hit the random C buttons on both textures a couple times so that those colors are spread out. And so, probably should explain this. The random on your top one, based on the current settings that we have right now, this is moving that paintbrush texture around and spreading that into different parts. And then this clouds here, when we hit random, the strength goes and fades in different parts just to give it a more unbalanced, unique effect. And so that's getting some good build up for our colors here. And then I'm gonna open up red finally, turn that back on, and I think I'm gonna give it a gray. So yeah, I believe I still have the hexadecimal copy. Yep. And I'm just gonna move this manually to give it a more bluish gray color. Simplify these numbers a little just to make it a little easier to work with if I need to adjust some things down the line. And next we need it. Also, need to go in and like all the other things for this particular model, we need to increase the world space normal. So we got some grays. I actually think I'm gonna lighten that color a little. Let's just put that to points. Maybe increase the saturation a little too. Get a bit more bluish. There we go. So now we got the smattering of random colors going on. Just gonna go into the mask one more time. Just the contrast and the balance of texture 1 to match the rest of what we've played with. Just actually, no, I think I'm going to leave it at that 0.750 just to get some variety and variation. And then do random a couple times to get some more spread out color. Alright, so now that we have that down, I'm going to just drop this back to 35. So now these effects are a lot more faded, the more stronger parts are popping up. Now the reason why we do all this coloration is so that we give the stylization filter something to work with to create that more hand-painted. Oh, look, looks like I painted a little here. Yeah. So we just give it that more hand-painted brushstroke thing to work with. So I'm just gonna just erase that, and that's gonna. There we go. That's one thing to point out, that the stylization is on a paint layer, so if you have that open and accidentally click on your model here, it will add white spots, which you can go over with the erase texture. So you can see as we zoom in here, it's starting to blend in that colorization we've set up together to make those brushstroke moments that we're kind of going with for the texture. Because if we turn off our coloration and just have our base color, we get a very uniform color still, aside from some of our ambient occlusion effects that we have going on based on our texture bakes. It doesn't have too much to work with. So that's why we run the coloration effect here to get that more painted look. And seeing this effect, I think I'm going to push the extremes on my colors a little more just to make it just a little bit more noticeable. So I'm going to increase that brightness here. That purple, I'm going to make it a little more darker. That's too dark. There we go. Then silver. Let's lower the saturation. Make it a little bit more noticeable. Put that stylization filter back on. Yeah, we're now getting a much better hand-painted look. We can see variations in the colors and all of that. That's really the effect that we're going for the art style. So let's turn that back off and move on. Edgeware. I do not know if I need edgeware for this model. Well, let's play with it around just to see what we get. So got some definitely targeting some interesting places. Now this artifact here, that's part of the texture baking. If I go back to my texture select, turn on the details, that's where this object is interacting with the other object. So we don't, if you see strange things like that, that's just how my model is working right now. So don't need to be too concerned about that. Well, let's play with the colors a little, see if it ends up being something we like. So I'm just gonna turn in that base color again and make it much more of a highlight. Maybe move this to the side a little more. Crank up that brightness. Bit of a highlight going on here. Let's play around with the effects to see what we get. So I think I need to play with random seed because that's going to affect the grunge that we have turned off. Turn down the contrast. That gives it a much more blurred effect. So maybe a low contrast on this would be a good idea. And do we need a little grunge? Might produce some interesting results when the stylization filter is applied here. Okay, so we're getting a more of an edge highlight kind of effect here. Move this. See what happens when I crank this. Ah, there we go. Much more blurred out effect. There's not strong edges on this like wood or things like that, but it does kind of give, that kind of struggle effect, like, whoever was painting this in a workshop or something like that really had troubles getting the edges just right. So just that little simulation of human error. And let's test that with this stylization filter. Yeah, get strokes mixing around here and there. That's actually producing a nice effect with that slight edge wear. I kind of like that. All right, just gonna close these down since we've moved on. The mask. So the mask, this is intended to be more of adding detail, to get that wood effect or that tile effect or whatever kind of detail you have for your object. So, just going to go into this generator, and this is using the same texture sets as, the generators we had for coloration. All these textures are stored here. You get some mixture, substance mix in normal stamps for this for some reason. It used to be separate, I believe, but for some reason they combined it. And it also stores some of your baked maps into here as well. So, looking at this, think if I could have an edge case, I don't need wood. That would look weird. But let's do that just for an example. If I take this grunge, wood hard, drop that in here, now it's applying this wood pattern all over the model. And if I turn on stylization back on, it gives it that hand painted look, that this is a wooden feature, a wooden object, but it's still that stylish painted look we're going for. This is kind of how we want you to get your details in, not using an actual material from Substance, but using these texture maps and blending them in through this mask. Let's see if there's some kind of rain effect here. It's grunge wipe. I think an outside, like, rusted look. Yeah, let's try that. Rust, like to imply, yes, grunge stains, heavy, leaks. Yeah, leaks. Let's do that. Just to give it a little, it's been outside and it's had some wear from storms and stuff. And, let's change this color. Think here for a moment. If I turn it to the blue, doesn't really stand out. Might make it dark, maybe. Blue isn't really selling it for me. Maybe more purple, red. Probably more something dirty. Let's go into our yellows here and play. Yeah, there we go. Dark brown tannish color. I think that's what I want here. And then just my own personal preference, simplifying the numbers a little here. So in case I need to copy something from one part of the model to another, one part of my texture set to another, easily memorize that or copy the hexadecimal, but I think that is getting a general dirty effect I like. Now let's go into the mask and see what this texture's options are. Each texture, by the way, does have its own unique options once you bring it in. So let's start playing with contrast. That's going to make it a lot more sharp. I think I like that faded look a lot more. Balance, kind of like a more general faded, so maybe just drop that down a little while I can still see some of the detail of it. Tiling. That's just going to repeat the pattern more and more. Kind of more sporadic. You're getting some obvious uniform repeating that tiling up, so maybe just make that to a 1.1. Tiling makes the texture overall smaller on top of your object, but as it gets smaller, that pattern will just loop and repeat. I think I'm just going to put it at 1.1 to make the details a little smaller, but avoid that constant repeating look. I'm surprised there isn't some more options to take into account height and stuff like that, but it is getting that basic effect, and plus we're using the colors, the stylization filter, so and I think it's sometimes tiling can only be done in full numbers, so this one is 2. Oh, and you can play with it right here too. There we go. 0.25. Some smaller details. Does moving this? Yeah. Sometimes you can move around with triplanar to affect its appearance in space. So if I just move this around, there we go. That was the effect I was looking for. It looks like it's being a little more top heavy, and I like that. Now let's test the stylization on that. Yeah, it's blending it in with the colors, but still giving a little more uniform thing. A more uniform effect, like, this thing has been outside and it's gotten dirty from the rain and nobody's come by to clean it. Yeah, that's looking really nice. Alright, turn it off. Now, shadows. Now, shadows, we've seen some interesting things just with problems based on the models themselves. So you're gonna have to just pay attention and see what problems you're. It really just depends on what your texture bake produces. And so what the shadows, as I have it set up normally, is it's just taking your ambient occlusion data and it's putting in these little shadows just where the light would normally have some issue bouncing to help sell that fake lighting look. So if I just play with it on and off here, you can see right now in these kind of crevice areas, it's just all more uniform color. And when I put that on, it gives that darkened effect just to really sell that baked lighting look. And pretty tame right now. Let's see what happens if I boost the contrast or lower it. It's kind of not standing out too much. Let's go into the color and darken it a little more. Kind of just really finding a balance of it, you know, creating that baked detail, but not being overly dominant. Yeah, you can really see it going on here in the cinder block feet, but I was expecting it to pop up more down here in some of these crevices. Oh, accidentally. Just go back here, see if there's a curvature setting in the mask. Not really. Probably I have to leave it at that. And some of you, again, this is more of a case by case basis. I know shadows was being overly oppressive on some of the objects that you've had made and ended up having to do hand painting for your texturing. It's just really hoping this works, and I think it works in most cases, but we've already seen some exceptions with some of the projects we've assigned so far, so just gonna play a little more, drop that to 5 and increase the contrast. That's fine, increase the blur at 5. It's popping up down here. I was hoping it would pop down here a little more. So maybe do a hand paint. So I'm just gonna go here, add a paint layer. And so how these paint layers are working, by the way, your mask is in values of black and white, and it's using white to let how much color through to create the appearance. And so I don't think I want a full on white. I think I'm gonna just do a 0.5. And let's just adjust this brush size, maybe 0.5 here. It's kind of a hard to get to spot. But try. Usually go on. There we go. Then got some mistakes here. Just gonna go over it with black just to erase that. There we go. We put that back to 0.5. Maybe do a 0.6. So it's not letting the color fully on through. There we go. Now we're getting some of that shadow effect. I think that's do a little bit here. Drop that to 0.4 for the outer. There we go. Much more fade. Like Russell right here. Alright. Just do black to erase the outlying parts here. Just want to keep the shadow contained within this nook crevice area. There we go. That's much more in line how I want that area popping up. Alright, now let's just do a stylization test. It's now blending the shadows together with the colors, giving it a stronger hand painted look, turning out really nicely. Alrighty. Obviously, we don't want this all for the entire object. There's some details here. So we can copy this material and apply it again to different parts by masking. One thing to note, I've seen this and repeated several times, when you've been repeating the base material and then masking out different parts to change colors, you've been copying the stylization filter, and stylization is a really heavy thing at work here. So when you start copying multiple things, it's been bogging down some of your files, and with some you would not as strong machines, it can really cause things to freeze up. So before copying the base material to change colors for different parts of the model, I'm just gonna undock it out of the folder, put it at the top of my hierarchy here, just so that we don't get that doubling up and we can keep the program running smoother. And then I'm just gonna delete this and then take my stylization filter, do a quick copy paste, and now let's add in a black mask to just decide how we're gonna change colors in the section. No, and you know what? Before I start doing that, I'm gonna go down here to the base color. Just gonna change it really quickly so that we can see it being something else when we start applying the mask. So I think I want to change the inside here, looking back at these reference images, you know, you got a lot of white on the inside of these kind of vending machines. So I'm going to do that, and, I'm going to do not a stencil. I want to do it'd be a paint by polygon option here. Get sauce. Some smudge. Hmm. Usually should pop it out. That's interesting. This is a black mask. Might be because it's a folder thing. Well, go ahead. Start painting that mask. start revealing the part on the texture. This is where I'm gonna look at my texture sheet. So this white area here that I want to be filling in. Let's try here, see if that lets me. They change it. Stamp, blur. Interesting. Usually, when painting with masks, there's an option to paint by polygon. Guess I'm just gonna have to hand paint it for now. Wait, interesting. Huh. Oh well. Just gonna paint. And you can see why I want to do paint by polygon. It's starting to spread to other parts of my texture set, which I don't want. So that's just really weird. Polygon fill. There it is. It's right in front of me. And I'm just gonna do a polygon fill so that way I can just click on the polygons, drag over, get what I want. So now I have this mask applied to the inside of my vending machine. Now I'm gonna get the light up here. Yellow a little. Let's see if I can. Is this it? Yeah, this is it. Fill that in. There we go. Looks like we got some blending going on just because of the normal paint. So let's just turn that all. That was because of the paint layer. So just turn this black to black, back to white, and then just redrag. So we have a nice clean mask in these polygon areas. So looks like I need to figure out where my edges are in here, so probably could have just left that mask. So let's select a polygon there and see where this is popping. Alright, popping the edges here. Okay. Like I separated my geometry here as well. See if we can find. Here we go. So let's this in real quick. Now we have that inside area all lit up in. There's a bit of darkness. That's because, again, I have an object getting involved, and there's two separate things of geometry going on in there. But, that's kind of fine for now. Going back to that second material, just gonna build everything back up from top to bottom again. So let's turn off the coloration, the masks, and the shadows, edgeware. Base color, I want this to be white, but not a total white. Let's make it kind of slight gray. So that's a 8. Let's do 7. There we go. That's just changing the colors here. I don't need to worry about that at all. if I do the solid gray, it's not gonna pop. Well, maybe a little bit of blue. Yeah, give it a little bluish saturation there. That's a little too strong. Just keep that at 1. There we go. Alright, do that. Copy the hexadecimal color here. Go into our coloration. We had this light blue. Let's see how it's looking by default. Bit of problem with my mouse. There we go. It's kinda working out. Turn these off one by one. That light blue isn't really standing out. Let's see if I move this down. Pops out more when I darken it. I want it to be bright. Try lowering the saturation. Got some very faint highlights going on. Let's just crank this all the way up. Gonna play around inside the filter here. Go down here and crank up that balance. There we go. Let's do 0.75. So now that's standing out. Contrast. I'm gonna leave that as it is. Let's go down here. More cloudy look versus painted look. And let's drop that down just a little. Same thing, the contrast. But now that's starting to stick out. Now, purples. Don't know if I want to leave it purple. Kinda working, kinda not. The green. Very similar to the dark green. Hmm. You know what? Take this color and make it more of a brown. Nah, let's leave that gray. I want to make this purple more brown. Just to imply a little bit of dirt with our effects. A little bit, something like that. Standing out, maybe a little darker. Increase the darkness of this gray as well. Little use the saturation. Blending together. Still getting a little too much of similarity, so maybe brighten this brown actually. Don't want too much of it. What happens? Play around our balance a little. Maybe I'll up the tiling just a little bit just to get some smaller sized spots. Bring contrast back up on this. It's a little too prevalent. Try global balance. Tiling at 5. Oh, scale for the clouds. There we go. There we go. Kind of like that. Play with that on and off a little. I don't want these colors a little less since it's a smaller space here. Let's crank up that gray balance. Oh, that's the wrong balance. Not this one. Boost up that contrast a little. Maybe do the tiling trick here too. There we go. Using it. All right, let's see what stylization work looks like. There we go. Much more hand painted interior. Kind of like that. Stylization off. Close this down. Edgeware. Really seeing anything popping up, just kind of how the interior is set up. Gonna leave that off. Mask. Mask. Maybe a little bit of dirt. Let's go in here, just search up dirt. Get some noises. Get different dirt. I like this more subtle dirt mask here. Let's put that in. Just get some more spots. Don't need a lot. Tiling. Not sure if I need any contrast here. Let's increase scale just slightly. Maybe balance as well. Let's test that with stylization. Uh, you can see some effects here. What it's doing in this case seems to be when we turn the mask off, it gets more color, but when we turn it on, we're getting some more sporadic strokes under the generator effects. Not sure if that's turning out anything too noticeable, but I'm just gonna leave it there. Let's check shadows. Yeah, now we got some edgeware filling up the crevices here. Play around with the changed it for the blue because it was standing. The purple wasn't really doing it for me. But now that this is a more white color, I think I'm gonna go back to that purple. Turn off my stylization here, just to sources. And then, no, let's go into getting kind of focusing on the corners right now. That inside mask. Thing. Not really. Yeah, it's just the existing mask from down here. That's interesting. Getting more mixed. My shadows are mostly coming from my coloration here and not my edge, my ambient occlusion filter. That's interesting. Let's try going back to here. I'm in the wrong filter. I was playing with my masks, not my ambient, not my mask here. So let's go back. I just accidentally set that to purple. So down was I was in the wrong thing. So now we want to go to shadows. There we are. Shadows is still purple. We don't need this paint mask right now. Now let's see what happens. So in where values kinda turn down the global blur. It is still really liking those corners and edges. Drop down the contrast a little before we start playing again. Oh, still getting some strong stuff in the corners here. Let's play around with blur. Yeah, let's put that around a 2. This is just more of a geometry thing I set up here that's getting this issue. Really filtering. So I'd probably have to go in and just paint along. So let's not that paint. We want it to be part of the layer, so add a part of the mask. So let's add a paint layer. Let's start with a 0.6. And it's in this polygon fill mode still. So I can just drag the insides. It was doing an autosave right there. Kinda matching up. Let's try a 0.75. Start dragging over here, doing this by polygon basis, and I probably could have done that instead. There we go, much more uniform. I probably could have been doing it in here just by polygon instead of hand painting it, just for some of these hard to reach in between areas back here on this mask, but there we go. It's a nice interior effect. Let's turn that on and off. There we go. Now we got a nice interior on. Turn on the stylization, see what we're getting. And I am liking the very noticeable strokes coming up here in the background, color here. I'm just going to copy this one more time. We do have some metal pegs down here that we can use quickly to give an example of introducing metalness when you need it. So I'm just gonna copy this group, paste it again, and gonna go into the mask here, right click, just clear mask. I think I should just make it all black. Make it all black, yeah. And then if I go back to polygon fill and if I select, let's go down below. It should be the same. So let's just make this black. There we go. So it's kind of blending in together here. That's interesting. Oh, it copied this material, I think. So let's delete that. Add black mask. A lot more blue here. Then I go into that base color. It's white. And all the other things off. So, oh, the edgeware is just being really dominant in this case. That's what was going on there. Just a quick demo. Since, these are metal pegs, we do want to turn that metal channel back on. And let's just do a 0.5. Just get that metallic look. And then we can turn back our coloration is on, so it is doing some blending here. And for this instance, since we know this is a metal object, this is when we would want the metal channel on. And metal just, changes how the light is absorbed by your object. Metal just absorbs light differently, and so that's what it's on. And so that's just a quick sample there. Alrighty, so this is probably the end of the overview of how to use the smart material in depth. So this is kind of general feedback. We saw a lot of questions of how to use the smart material, and I just wanted to create this big video to cover everything to help create a more uniformed outlook for your projects. So follow this, take what you've learned here, use that to improve on your models, and we'll look forward to your pass offs on Saturday.